Then we looked at, the functions of how do we manage HR and coordinate HR activities. And then we covered a unit which was contemporary issues, of the issues which are ongoing issues that HR managers face within the organization, called contemporary issues. And then we went to something which was related to, basically global, I would say, talent management. Now, what we read in that unit is that because HR as a concept, came across when industrialization happened, a lot of people started to work within factories or were employed within factories, production facilities. That is where the management of human resources actually came into foray. And when we look at that aspect, over the years, this has undergone a lot of change. So after the World War II, we had the industrialization. Industrialization led to, the creation of unions, employee labor relations, things like that. And then it progressed into 90s. Then we had the dot-com bubble in 2000. After that, we saw the rise of, millennial organizations or organizations wherein, certain practices, which we refer to practices like discrimination, practices like flexibility in terms of work hours. We look at, gender pay gap and things like that. That, after studying a bit of those contemporary issues, we went to the concept of something called talent management, because in today's climate and context, when technology plays a very key part, in any organization, any business, HR also got enabled with a lot of tools through which the process of managing, planning, which is essentially HR planning, the strategic objective and the part of it, were all then brought into something, into the next phase, let me put it this way, wherein after you do the recruitment and selection, and you have, done the other bits and functions of things like training and development, how do you retain the talent within the organization became important. So there was a lot of churn or turnover of employees, as we call it, which used to happen within organizations. If you look at organizations in the 70s and the 80s, when we had the differentiation between the private and the public sector, a lot of people, wanted to work in the public sector, obviously because of the benefits. They used to get the longevity in the jobs. And obviously one job for life kind of a concept was there. But as more and more people have started to get employed, the market has become very competitive, and because skill sets which the organizations require are scarce, or they are very particular about choosing candidates against the job descriptions they have, it has become very important within organizations to manage the expectation of the talent once you recruit them. So that was the unit, in terms of our journey that we've done so far. And we stopped at that particular unit wherein, we discussed things in terms of how to manage talent, what is the talent management process, how do you differentiate between talent, and then nicely leading on to when organizations look at retaining the top quality manpower in the organization, or you try and retain individuals which are performing to the organizational, and performing and contributing to the achievement of organizational objective. What we do see is that the organization has to put, or the businesses have to put, suitable, we use the word compensation, or interchangeably use the word remuneration, or we use reward or management or incentives in different contexts of the usage on a day-to-day basis. But the essential thing here is that when you try and retain people within the organization, you have to put suitable rewards. If they are performing, then they are having a bit of a, the organizations are very literally say carrot and stick approach. That means if you end up doing this and you achieve that, you get this reward. So the idea of understanding that once you retain talent within the organization at different levels, different departments, the HR managers are required to now put into place practices which evaluate performance basis, the skill set, and the role and responsibility entrusted to the employees within the organization. So if I take a small example here to look at this particular unit that we are covering, performance and reward management, when you look at HR implementing the same set of policies in engineering, in finance, in administration, in production, in sales, in marketing, whichever department you look at, they have to have different benchmarks or different KRAs, key result areas, which they have to measure, and the measurement techniques to evaluate how the performance is to be looked at against the objectives given are different. So an example here would be when you look at people in sales and marketing. Marketing might be measured on the market share they are able to achieve, how much of brand recall they have. So some of the qualitative factors which marketing managers would be evaluated on. But when you look at sales managers, they will be evaluated on in terms of the revenue that they have been given as a target and whether they've been able to achieve that as a target. So the performance management will happen around the target set and how the individual is achieving or faring in terms of achieving that target. But in the case of people who are in marketing or strategic marketing as a function, they would be measured on things like market share, the volume of products sold, profit and loss, because their KRA would be, or key result areas would be essentially looking at how they put programs or promotions into place which help in the achievement of strategic objectives, which is related to market share, revenue share, profitability of the organization. And that is where the product manager who's working within marketing, his role differs from the one which is in sales, and his role is to go out and meet customers, get the orders. But the product manager's responsibility is to look at coming out with innovative products which are meeting customers' expectation, also exceeding, and having better features and qualities related to competitors' product, wherein the product is being the sales manager is able to sell that in the market. So when we look at the benchmarks in terms of their measurement of performance, the KRA and how the measurement techniques have to be looked at are different for different departments. Now, somebody in the administration, which is in the support function, might not be required to do sales or maybe look at qualitative or strategic objectives independent, but their performance is going to be measured in terms of on a day-to-day basis, the task given, the delegation of the task given, to paperwork, things like that. How quickly are they doing it and how they're faring on that. So the performance model in learning outcome 1 that we understood was this concept of understanding what is performance, why is it important from an organizational perspective, how the organization looks at managing this performance using a performance management cycle. A lot of policies in HR which are created to look at annual appraisals or look at 360-degree feedback. We look at balanced scorecard. Now these techniques are basically techniques which are created in order to review the performance of an employee against the targets or the objectives set at the beginning of the year. So for a sales manager, you might see that these are being measured and reviewed on a weekly, monthly, quarterly basis, because if you slip on sales target for the first month, it's very unlikely that you'll achieve the target across the quarter. So sometimes, depending on the the complexity of the function and the responsibility, the level of the responsibility, sometimes this review of performance happens on a daily, weekly, even fortnightly and monthly basis. But when you look at qualitative objectives in terms of measurement of market share or things like which are to do with profitability which has been achieved by selling a particular product. If we look at large brands like Unilever, they have lots of detergents or soaps that they sell. But each product manager who manages one category of soap is responsible for its own performance. For example, Dove. Now, how is the soap selling in one market, second market, overall, what is the revenue it brings? Now, these kind of things cannot be measured on a daily basis or on a weekly basis, but more so on a monthly, quarterly, and annual basis. So here, the differentiation has to be done when the performance management cycle is put in place. The HR knows and has put this policy in place to ensure that the performance of the individuals can be measured as per the objective set and for the duration of the objective set. So this is what we covered in first part. We also looked at some of the theoretical aspects of the goal setting theory. What does it mean? What is the relevance of the goal setting theory when we look at understanding this theory in theories of motivation? And when organizations use it, they look at basically matching individuals' skill against the roles and responsibility given. And then in the extrinsic expectancy theory, we talked about basically looking at what is the cause and effect or cause of behavior which the individual is likely to have if this incentive is given or if this particular reward is put in place. So here the behavior of the individual is anticipated while giving the roles and responsibility, because at this stage you expect that the individual working in the organization has had number of years of experience, has the skills and the basic requirements, but The behavior is judged because it dictates kind of commitment and engagement on the goals and objectives set by the organization. And then we look at certain categorization of rewards. How do we look at extrinsic and intrinsic rewards? So how do you in some cases when individuals work, they look at working for money. In some cases, individuals, when they work within the organization, they work for reputation and status. So they expect that they are going to be getting rewards for delivering a certain type of performance. And in intrinsic rewards, what we saw was that in these kind of rewards, the person in that particular role is actually self-motivated and understands the delegation of responsibility given by the organization and is proactive in its approach, because he or she feels that if I do not deliver on my objectives, then it would or it could fail actually the organization. And again, the expectancy here is that if I do my work for which I'm employed, I'm happy and I get paid at the end of the month in terms of my wages. When we look at extrinsic rewards, it's primarily that the employees have an expectation of receiving rewards, and these could be external from the organization. In some cases, when I say extrinsic, we are also looking at tangible rewards. That means sometimes you will see good performers or excellent performers get more incentive or a percentage more on the incentive. They might get an incentive trip like a holiday trip abroad and things like that. So they tend to be people in terms of when their expectation is that we need to be rewarded because we have achieved so and so or overachieved so and so in terms of the objectives being set. The other key things that we looked at was we understood what is the psychology or the scientific management behind why reward mechanism or reward management as a mechanism is required within organizations now. And here we relate back to things which is related to commitment, motivation, engagement, and loyalty towards the organization. And over the years, when you look at this as a concept in the early 80s, 70s and 80s wasn't there, but this as a concept has emerged in the early 90s, wherein if the organization wants to achieve more and they achieve more because of the individual performing well or the individual's contribution being more to the organization, they over a point in time have come up with this concept of something called the reward management. And here we learned a couple of aims and objectives of why this has been put. And we also looked at certain models, how this particular strategy is actually put into practice by an HR department, wherein they integrate the elements of reward. Now, some of these rewards are extrinsic and some of these rewards are intrinsic. So when we look at intrinsic awards, you're looking at job evaluation, pay gauge structure, market rate analysis, that, okay, if I have a general manager working within the company, we pay the general manager that much, but what is the benchmark of the pay for a similar role outside in the market paid for by the competitor? So those kind of things are looking at, intrinsic side, and then some of the additional benefits which employees end up getting, which could be things like allowances, bonuses, you get additional pay because you've achieved a particular target or hit a particular strategic goal. And those could be a combination of financial, non-financial rewards, but they are generally, or when we say tangible, intangible reward, but they are extrinsic, and they then kind of say it is a total remuneration of this particular title or this role is so and so. Now, a typical example that I would say here would be when you look at senior management recruitment, you tend to see that in senior management positions, they have a base salary package, and they say, okay, if you achieve these qualitative factors, like the company's share price hits such and such mark, a company is able to hit a turnover of this and this, or the company is able to achieve a profitability of this and this, then if these qualitative targets are met, the CEO, the senior management team gets an X amount of bonus or stock option plan, or gets an additional remuneration in terms of financial rewards. So that is then a combination of showing that you have a base salary, but you have base incentive which everybody gets according to your pay grade and the structure within the organization or your hierarchy within the organization. But if you help achieve more and these objectives, which are qualitative objectives which are met, then you end up getting higher compensation or higher benefits, and that then forms a part of something called total remuneration. We also looked at, over the years, obviously a lot of research has been done. We looked at 2 or 3 models. One of the clear models which basically looks at, which has been proposed by Perrin, talks about, total reward management within an organization, and it looks at 4 quadrants wherein you have tangible, intangible rewards, you have individual as well as, group awards, wherein if the company achieves, everybody gets a pay rise at the end of the year. If the company does not achieve, if the profitability target is not met, the pay rises are selective because individuals have selectively performed in terms of their key result areas, and that is where the pay and benefits do tend to then vary. So this is a model that we need to be aware of as an HR manager, so that you're able to balance between when the compensation has to be decided or reward management has to be done. You need to be clear about how do you divide them into 4 aspects, which is pay, which are basic elements that the individual gets when they're employed. Along with that, you get the benefits, which are standard across the organization, learning and development, which are qualitative objectives, which you are put into, or you get an opportunity to do, get into because of the fact that you're performing well, the organization loves you, or wants you to succeed and wants to retain you. Then you're put into career development, learning and development, which basically helps you achieve certain qualitative goals. And last but not the least, certain aspects of the external environment, which help or go against you when you look at meeting some of these objectives in terms of reward management. Last but not the least, we looked at certain performance management strategies, which over the years have come up within the companies, and I put a nice little link to a YouTube video which talks about why performance management is important, why the performance review of the performance is important to ensure that the organization has a workforce which actually is apt enough to perform in the roles and responsibilities given. And then some of the basic strategies which a lot of organizations look at today in terms of employing, when they look at measuring performance using PMC, which is performance management cycle, or using one of the models wherein they try and decide a structure of how the compensation and rewards will be set, and how they will differentiate between the the contributions made by individuals within the organization. And towards the end, what I've done is I've put in a bit of a table as an example to explain, if you look at grade and you look at the hierarchy of the organization, there are different types of, employees. The categorization of the employees can be done in a different categories. And there, according to the categorization, sometimes you have different performance measures, and then commensurate to that, you have rewards which are provided to the individuals if they meet those targets or objectives which have been set. So, in a nutshell, what we did was we covered in Learning Outcome 1 to understand, what is performance management, what is reward management, why are these two components linked, and how they are put into practice within an organization. And we looked at some basic theories and also, certain models which are important from a theoretical standpoint of view to understand Learning Outcome 1. Is that okay?
Yes, please.
Okay. Now, in Learning Outcome 2, we are going to be looking at, taking this, discussion a bit further. And here we are going to be trying to understand, how, what is the relationship essentially between employee motivation and reward management, how performance management is affected by external environment. And last but not the least, we want to understand if there is any sort of a relationship between performance and reward management, performance in and then working basically in terms of training and development for individuals working within the organization. And last but not the least, we are going to look at certain aspects of understanding why learning and development as a strategy is important to create the balance between what kind of performance an employee gives and the organization's expectation of that performance. A simple example just to explain, here would be that if an organization decides, say a small business decides that this year, last year our turnover was say 200 million, we're looking at, doubling the turnover this year to 400 million. Now, once the target has been set and the objectives have been set by the senior management, there has to be a realistic dipstick or a check required to be done to see if the organization's if the organization structure is geared enough, so if the organization structure is geared enough, to handle or achieve that target. Now, if that is the case, then that target will be achievable. The employees will, the HR will break the strategic target objective down into smaller targets, which are departmental targets, and then break them down further into key result areas for employees at the lowermost level. Now, when that happens, you will see that if the targets are achievable, realistic, or as we call them, smart targets, you will see that the overall organization is motivated. There is a sense of engagement and commitment from each and every employee to achieve and go out and achieve that target. And that then helps, the organization achieve that doubling of the turnover which they have planned for. But in order to put this into place, the HR plays a very key important role, and their role is to understand in terms of putting the reward management strategy into place to see how many of them are motivated by financial rewards, how many of them are motivated by intrinsic or extrinsic awards. And there they have to create a balance to see that if we are putting people into place, and these people which have been put into place are motivated enough, are going to engage with the organization, and also are committed to achieving this. So we are going to be studying essentially, in short, relationship between motivation and learning and development, relationship between performance and the type of reward management which the HR can put in place, and to a certain extent, what are the external factors. Now we go back to dipping into something called the PESTEL framework, which we've looked at earlier in some of the units, like how are the political, economic, social, cultural, legal, technological factors actually affect the company or the business. And those factors also have a role to play when we look at understanding this connect between motivation, performance, reward, and engagement as individual components under this particular learning outcome. So that is what we're going to study in learning outcome 2. And what we'll do is, in order to study this, we'll go through a couple of slides to understand each of these relationships or connections, and then if you have any questions, then we will discuss as we go along. Okay.
Yes.
Now, one of the key things that comes to mind when we look at, say for example, discussing performance management, reward management. Now, why do you think we need performance management, or why do you think we need reward management? This is something that we've answered in the first learning outcome. Now, you require them because at some stage you need to be able to measure. I'm not going to use the word review. You're going to measure what you've achieved vis-a-vis what was set. Now, in some cases, as the objectives increase and the objectives become, I would say, qualitative and quantitative, that means your roles and responsibilities increase. So at some stage, in order to push and in order to kind of stretch you to be able to achieve that stretch target, as we say, the companies then put some sort of a incentive policy, bonuses, or some sort of a management of rewards, as a structure in place. One clear example that I would give here, when we look at a connect. Now, in order for the organization to make the employees feel welcomed and wanted, you sometimes see that in organizations, what they do is they have a policy that if you have spent 5 years in the organization, they normally give you a watch. For 5 years of service and commitment to the organization, they show some sort of, they basically reward you by showing their appreciation that you have actually contributed, towards the objectives of the organization for 5 years. They have an award at 10 years, and at the award at 15 years, 20 years, 25 years, and at 25 years, sometimes you see that some organizations might give some additional cash incentive or some sort of a very, like a trophy or a replica of, maybe a silver or a gold-plated trophy, which goes to show that you have been stead strong with the organization for a period wherein the organization has gone through good and bad times, and in order to appreciate the service and commitment and engagement that you have brought to your role over the last so many years, the organizations have this kind of a reward mechanism. Now, this bit, when we put C, this is implemented in all organizations at whatever level, and at the lower level, you normally see cash incentives. At middle, or let's put it this way, if you look at junior or middle management, you will normally see, apart from the cash incentives, there are some additional benefits that you get, which is directly related to your pay. And when we look at those, factors, and if you understand that, that is nothing but you see the concept of reward management actually working within an organization. And all this is done because the companies want the employees to be more productive, more efficient, and achieve more so that the overall organization achieves more. Now here, when we look at the first aspect of understanding, how do we evaluate performance and reward management, and if they are influenced by factors from the external environment or internal environment, what we need to be able to do is we need to understand and clearly differentiate between the different types of reward and what is pay. So when we looked at the framework, essentially, in the first arrow of reward management, and if I just briefly bring that back, just to put this into context. So this bit, when we look at, when we understand that, when we look at the whole components of compensation, we look at something wherein you have a base pay, you have contingency pay, you have employee benefits. Now, these are things which you get when you are employed within an organization. You get the job opportunity or a job role, and you're given a description, you've been shortlisted. You clearly, before applying to a company, you clearly know that this is the job which pays this much, this is the title, these are going to be the responsibilities, and give or take, depending on your experience, your remuneration basically remains the same. Now, once you have joined, and if you start performing and you show exceptional performance, then there are other types of rewards which the HR can put into place, which could mean performance management rewards, and in some cases it could be non-financial rewards. So those then kick in, and they also become a part of your total package. To explain an example, you have two general managers working within the organization, one who's about 5 years into the role and one who's 25 years into the organization. The one which is 5 years into the organization is performing exceptionally well. The one which has been in the organization for about 20-25 years has always performed and has always met the criteria as being set, and that's why he's been retained in the organization. So who do you think will have more salary or more total remuneration? General manager with 5 years of experience or general manager with 20 years of experience?
Depending on what they are looking at or the basis of which they will be rewarded. Because I can't say because you have you have what it takes to achieve things, and because you've been there for 5 years, they should reward you. When you have someone who has been there, your predecessor who has been there for over 25 years, and the only reason why the person will be in the company for over 25 years without being laid off is because the person has potentials too. So I don't know the basis of which they will be rewarded, but whatever it is.
So what you said is correct. So the answer here is that definitely both of them will be on a different pay scale and a structure, but they are maybe working at the same level. The one which has 20 years of experience might have higher, total remuneration package, because his remuneration package would consist of maybe the number of years of experience that he's had, the skills that he's had, and those have all added to him getting a little higher base salary because of the experience he has. And the one person who's performing exceptionally well, has got promoted in the last 4 or 5 years and has reached that position, is doing exceptionally well, but his salary, because he's at the same grade, might have the same base salary, but after the base salary is the same, the skills, the experience, and the number of years that the person has worked in the organization will actually come into play, and that is where it will differentiate the total pay the person takes home, in these two cases. So it will depend on experience, it will depend on the skills that you have, the number of years that you work within the organization, and other factors which would be based on the basis of performance and also your commitment and loyalty to the organization. Now, here, the experience factor that the person has gained is an external factor to a certain extent, because that person with 20 years of experience might have worked for 5 years in one organization, 5 years in another organization, has and now spent about 10 years or 12 years in the same organization. And because he's come from 2-3 different organizations, he has had some external experience. In most cases, here what tends to happen is if you have a person working within, say, Samsung, they work for a couple of years within the company, then they switch over to Microsoft, then they switch over to, say, Amazon, they switch over to Facebook. What you see is that the person moving between different organizations, but every time the person moves, his pay, his level, his structure changes, because the person is not just moving. He could have stayed within the organization, got an annual raise or an appraisal, and obviously after that got a promotion or whatever when he was due. But in order to look at, exponential growth in the career, the person tends to move different from one organization to the other, depending on the opportunities that the person is able to get. And that allows the pay structure to become different. The level at which the person joins the organization becomes different. So he might have been an assistant general manager or for example, a senior manager in one organization, but because when he changed the jobs, he jumped over from being a senior manager to a general manager. And that was only possible by changing the organization rather than staying in the same organization, which would have meant that he would have got into that role, but maybe in that role in the next 10 years. And change of job has allowed him to basically get into that position sooner than what he could do by staying in the same organization. So this is where we would look at the connection between why people sometimes look at changing jobs, and why they change jobs is because they get a rise in an exponential rise in salary or a pay grade. They get a rise in their title or their roles and responsibilities, and they, to a certain extent, feel that some of the external factors under which they are working are better for another organization, and that is why sometimes you see the switchover essentially happens. Now, if I have to expand these, because I want to look at a link between what is the link between performance and reward management and how these are influenced by external environment, we look at understanding some basic concepts. Sometimes you will see the power balance in culture, or when we say power balance within the organization is swaying, or the power balance within the organization to a certain extent, when we look at is in this case, for example, changing because of the change in management. Now, when we look at that, what we do tend to see is that this is related to the culture and the place where the organization is actually based. So by taking an example that you work in a US-based bank, say for example Citibank, but Citibank has operations across the world. So when you look at Citibank working in the UAE or Middle East, what they will see is that at some stage, because they have to follow rules and regulations which are respective for that particular country, what they have to look at is they have to look at adopting the culture so that they are successful in that particular market. And in this case, it would mean that when we look at UAE as a market, it's a male-dominated market. The men in that market get more remuneration as compared to women, and that is a culture which the American organization has to embrace in order for it to be successful within that particular geography or that country. So the example that I've given here specifically is relating to the fact that when businesses become global, they have to operate in different countries, and when they operate in different countries, they have to adopt and comply with different law and legislation in that country. And in order to do that, sometimes they have to deviate from the core values, which define the organization. And that is where it's an example of an external factor, which is culture in that location, affecting the policies of the organization. Is that clear?
Yes, please.
Yeah. Now, some of the other factors that we look at is financial remuneration. So when we talk about compensation or basically pay packages for the organization, for the individuals within the organization, we sometimes see that because of the exchange rate. So if a BBC news presenter works in the UK, they might be getting say £100,000. But the same presenter, if they work in China or in the US or in any other regional market, there the salary or the remuneration which the individual will get will be related to the aspect of how the basically related to that country. It's because pound to a dollar exchange rate is higher, so in some cases you would see that the salary would be either slightly lower or maybe slightly higher, depending on how the exchange rate mechanism and the equality is taking place in the market. A simple example is when you look at, say, I know for say UK, when we look at the exchange rate of the pound with the Nigerian naira, you look at 1 pound equal to 300 Nigerian naira. So there's a lot of differentiation in terms of the financial remuneration, because if you look at 2,000, 3,000 pounds, and we convert that to essentially Nigerian currency, then what you get to see is that becomes a big amount for somebody to work, say for example, get employed and obviously get some of the benefits within that market. So sometimes looking at that, what we are also saying is that this is an external factor which can affect many organizations, is because sometimes you will see that in certain countries, the pay package has to be adapted, to the conditions within that market or the exchange rate from within the market, and that is where you will see literal comparison between the pay packages cannot be done. Now, when we look at labor market, this is another point. Why is it an external factor? Because when a company works as a global business, you will see that if they have operations in different countries and they employ people in different, employ people in those countries in different roles, you will see that the labor laws and legislation has to be complied with. And in some cases, what you have to do is when they look at complying with those, locations, labor's laws and legislation, the company has to make amends to its policies and procedures, and that is where you get to see that this and then becomes an external factor. Is that okay?
Yes.
Now, there are some of the other things which are also external factors, and we refer to PESTEL here. So, political climate, pertinent example, Brexit as of now in the UK. If you look at, a lot of businesses face uncertainty who are exporting to Europe and are dependent on supply chains, with other companies coming in from Europe. The Brexit has posed a bit of an uncertainty, and this is an external factor which is not in control. Basically, external means it is not in control of the business or the organization, but it is it's not the only one which will get affected, but there are other organizations which will also get affected. And those are the factors that we look at when we look at, understanding how can external factors impact performance and reward management. Is that okay?
Yes, sir.
Now, I'm going to skip 1 or 2 slides because I think as long as you've understood the concept of why they affect and how they can affect, there are different factors that are listed out in the slides for you to go through. Now, let's look at an example, a specific example, when we look at external factors. Now, when we talk about reward management, performance management as a unit, as a module, within that, if I have to specifically look at one component, again, when I say one component, what I'm looking at is, when we look at one of the components, in this case, when we look at compensation, reward management, we look at one of the components in, the whole strategy. So when we look at that, and if I just pick out compensation as an element, now, compensation is important because at some stage you see all workers work within the organization because of money, because of the pay or the wages that they receive at the end of it when they deliver the work. So compensation, if I have to divide, it can be divided into monetary and non-monetary rewards. Now, sometimes you will see when I say compensation is you get the wage and the salary in any case, but apart from that, there are perks which are given which are monetary compensation. That means you are given some employee stock option plan, which you can divest in 5 years if you stay within the company. Now, that is a monetary option, but that monetary option you exercise after putting in 5 years of the service. And that is then monetized because that's a piece of paper. You have certain stocks which have been given, by the company. But if you've spent 5 years, that stock or the paper absolutely becomes valuable. Once you've completed the 5 years, you are allowed to freely sell those stocks in the market in exchange, and you return what you get, benefits in return, which is basically monetary benefit. That means you'll get some additional payout. Now, when you look at compensation, so how is compensation affected by external factors? Looking at a key criteria, as we study different types, a lot of different components of reward management. One of the components is compensation. Now, it can be affected by internal and external factors. How do we look at internal factors? The ability to pay, the business strategy, the goal which the company is setting, and whether the individual achieves that goal or not. How is your job, evaluation done, which is basically performance management done or appraisal done at the end of the year. And last but not the least, at what level, in terms of the working within the organization you are. Say, for example, grade. So are you at the front line? That means you are at grade 1, 2. Are you at the middle management, junior management, senior management, or are you in the top management? So these factors affect your pay or your compensation. Now, somebody who's an employee who's working at the reception, somebody who's an employee who's working primarily at the front office, you will see obviously their salary and the benefits they get, are base as defined in the the job description. But as you go up the hierarchy, what you will see is that the pay increases, the number of benefits they increase, and because you are given goals, maybe the receptionist or the front office is not given any goals, but if they are given goals and they're able to achieve, like for example, they pick up the phone call in 2 or 3 rings, they have a turnaround time on providing solution, some sort of troubleshooting solution to customers at the reception within 10 minutes. These criteria, which when measured, can actually lead to some sort of reward management or additional compensation to show that you are performing your job exceptionally well. These external factors which will affect compensation would be things like, what is the going rate in terms of salary levels in the market. So if the market is growing, if the industry in general is quite buoyant, you will see that there is a demand for individuals which companies sometimes look at from competitors, and if they have to employ those people within their own company, they have to basically hire them at higher pay and obviously higher compensation. Because if you want a performing employee from an organization to come from a different organization or a competitor organization to come into your organization, you might sometimes, you have to pay higher compensation. And in some cases, you will see a case in point that sometimes you see senior people or executives leaving the organization. When they leave, they go on garden leave, or basically a time period in which they are not allowed to work or not leave the organization because they're completing the notice period, which is called garden leave. They are continued to be paid their basic salary and perks and emoluments because the company wants to for as long as possible, so that when they do switch over, they have information which is not up to date, which the competitors need. And the same individual actually, if the first organization hiring that person decides that, okay, we'll pay your compensation and join immediately. Now, this is a case in point that you get to see in the case of, say, football managers. When they decide that they have been sacked or they have left, now other football clubs, if they want the managers or they want the players, they even look at hiring them and pay compensation, in terms of monetary compensation when they take the player or hire the manager. So you might have a 5-year contract, and if you end up leaving your contract, you have to pay the employer a certain amount, or your employer has put some condition, and sometimes you will see the companies buy out that, and that is done and included in their compensation package. So this will say that you have a 3 months garden leave period. We will pay you your wage and also the 3 months notice pay that you owe to your previous employer. Is that okay?
Yes, please.
Yeah?
Yes.
And what I've done in 1 or 2 slides now is basically listed out some of the internal factors and external factors that you get to see being implemented to understand the relationship between performance and reward management. Okay?
Yes, please.
Okay. Now, let's look at the second assessment criteria, which is talking about how do we understand choices and when do you have to play the card of performance management, and when do you have to play the card of reward management within the organization if you work within HR. Now, when we look at, first part was to look at understanding external factors. Okay. Now, in this part, we are going to understand the internal factors which affect the relationship between performance and reward management. Okay. So
yes,
I hope it's not getting. I hope you understood that the first assessment is criteria is to look at studying factors affecting the organization and the link between performance and reward from an external perspective. And in the learning, in the assessment criteria 2.2, we are going to see this from an internal context or internal perspective. Now, some of the factors which are internal, why do we say they are internal? Is because these are factors which are in control of the employees or in control of the organization. Now, one of the internal factors that we look at is motivation. Now, why do you think is some motivation is called is internal? Because the organization to a certain extent can drive motivation or motivate a person to do a particular task by increasing the compensation or reward or the pay for that particular job or that particular employee, because they want that job to be accomplished earlier, and that creates motivation. Okay.
Yes, please.
The other thing would be ownership. Sometimes when you see people at the senior position, they are not just looking at getting rewards financially. They want more responsibility or greater responsibility. So if the head of the department ends up leaving, what you will see is that the head of department, if it ends up leaving, there's the person who's been performing that role quite well is being asked to step up into that role and take ownership of that role. Now, taking the ownership does not mean that the person might start getting the same salary as the person leaving is getting because of the number of years of experience or the other differing factors. But here, stepping into that role and giving the ownership to the most enthusiastic, motivated or engaged person is good enough to ensure that the role is going to perform and the person is going to perform. So ownership is also important when we when we look at internal factors which affect performance and reward. Sometimes you will see some employees become quite possessive and they try and have that ownership of the sense of ownership or basically sense of responsibility for a particular job or responsibility given, and that is good enough for them to be able to drive this home, or for example take it from start to finish. And then we look at things like the tasks which are set. Sometimes the HR has to evaluate whether these tasks are meaningful. Are these targets which have been set? Are these smart targets? Are they specific? Are they measurable? Are they realistic? Are they achievable? Are they time bound? And how each of these targets which have been set affect the employee motivation, affect the engagement of the individual in doing that particular role, and that is defined under something called the meaningful task. Now, an example that I will give you here is that if you have a person with a certain set of skills and you ask that person to take up a particular role in which he or she essentially does not have the required skills, you will see that the person becomes demotivated, or if the person's role has not changed, or if it's a temporary change, then that's fine. But if it becomes permanent, you will see that either there are two things which can happen. One, either the person will, because of the intrinsic factors, being self-motivated, will shape up and be in the role, or the person will actually start finding a job or shape out, as we call it, and start finding a job to leave the organization to go back into a role which he or she is more comfortable. So sometimes you will see HR has to do this, matchmaking to see that the skills and the roles and responsibilities and the key result areas, KRAs, which are being set are meaningful to the skill set and the experience of the employee working within that role. Okay?
Yes, please.
Now, there are other points like team composition. We look at, why we look at putting teams into place, because you want higher performance or you want bigger objectives to be accomplished, which require people to work together in teams. And those people working closely together in teams are able to understand each other, network with each other, balance out each other, and also are able to, work well together to be able to achieve the overall set objective. So in this case, when we look at team composition, this is also an internal factor, is that when you try and put together a team for a project, it is decided internally within the organization. That is why it's an internal factor. Okay. Now, when I use the word core norms, what I mean here is that when we look at global organizations, they have their own policies and procedures in place. And when we look at their policies and procedures in place, they work within different geographies or different countries in the world. What we do get to see is that in some cases, they expect the employee to conform to certain norms. That means in terms of the working culture would be that they expect the employees, when they are given a contract, to start the job at 9 o'clock in the morning and finish at 5 o'clock in the evening. That is a norm which has been set within the organization. Isn't it? If they expect that, when I say in terms of another norm, if I give you an example, would be the case that if they are going to call in sick, there is a process which they've been, highlighted, and they have undergone an induction initially when joining the role, is that you need to inform your immediate line manager with regards to the reason of why you're not going to be, working or coming today because of so and so reason. So at least there is somebody in the organization which is aware of, and that reporting is one of the norms set by the organization. And this is again internal to the organization. So in some cases, if I look at Facebook as an organization, they might say, okay, if I'm not feeling well today, I have a dodgy stomach, I can work from home. But that is a norm which is acceptable within that organization. But if you work within a company which is manufacturing cars and you're required on the shop floor, you can't be telling your boss that, okay, I can't come in today, can I work from home? Can you give me some work wherein I can work from home? Because that as a norm is not accepted by the organization, because you are required to be physically present to carry out that responsibility. Is that okay? So is the concept of norms clear? And why do we say again it is internal to the organization? Because it is dependent on the employee, and it is basically between the employee and the organization, and it is internal to the organization.
Okay.
Sometimes it is to do with the work culture, sometimes it is to do with the structure of the organization, sometimes it is to do with the policies and procedures which are followed within the organization, and all these are things which are internal to the organization. Okay? Now, towards the end, what we started on the journey today was to try and understand the relationship. Now that we know what is performance and reward management, how they work interdependently, let's look at evaluating how much of the relationship between two actually affects employee morale, motivation, engagement, and their learning and development within the organization. So what I've done is I've put together a few points which are going to look at, doing evaluation of that relationship. So one of the key clear points that we look at sometimes is that when you are meeting expectations, you are rewarded. So how is your performance measured? When you meet expectations, your performance is rewarded. That means if as a sales manager, I've been given a target of say 100 million pounds to achieve this year, and if I've achieved that target, obviously I'm appreciated for the work, and maybe when the incentive policy was announced, if I ended up achieving 100%, then the company makes it looks at making an additional payout of so and so, which you get at the end of the year. Now that is something which looks at a balance between performance and rewarding the individual who has met that particular performance criteria, and that tends to be motivating for the employee, because they are happy to say that they have achieved 100% in terms of the target set, and that 100% achievement has actually allowed the company or the organization to achieve its overall objective. Now, the other thing that we look at, and let's look at another point or an argument, would be that when you look at training and development. Now, training and development is something which, for example, that particular department, when they look at their own evaluation, what they look at is what are the gap areas that the employees need to be developed in by giving training and development, or by looking at introducing them into training programs. Now, sometimes you will see that a case in point that I will give you is that when you look at smaller organizations, typically all the main meetings, all the main trainings, the owner ends up going into, because he's the only one, or he's the only person actually who's working on those particular target. So in this case, what you will see is that person, the interest, when we say the behavior of that individual is looked at, again going back to the psychology of reward management, and here the behavior is looked at whether the person is going to be interested in that role or not interested in that role. So sometimes there are opportunities which come and individuals want to apply, and those opportunities, when they come, the opportunities are looked at from an aspect that no, this person would not be interested in this role. He is too content within the job that he's doing. Or we need to pick up this employee because he's more enthusiastic, more passionate, more daring, more willing to take risks, and he would be the person who will be motivated or interested in actually picking up this responsibility. So that is where you look at the difference between somebody who's more motivated and would be more tuned to exceeding target or taking on that challenge, because they see a direct connection in terms of the employee being hungry to get more success and to get more compensation or more reward. Now,
okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm sorry, please. Can I ask a question?
Go ahead.
The other time you talked about when an employee meets the criteria of performance and is being rewarded. My question is this: if I work in a company and I'm rewarded shares from the company, and to grow or for me to be able to sell in 5 years' time,
yes.
What if I leave the company? Is this still valid? What if I get a better opportunity from another company, so I leave there for another company? Can I still have access to the shares that I was rewarded to? Or I'm going to lose it once I leave the company?
Now, it's a very good question you have asked. Now, normally, when you look at that kind of a reward management which is put in place, wherein this reward is going to be let's put it this way, extraordinary over and above the normal rewards that you can get, which is like a bonus or an incentive, holiday trip, maybe a rise in salary at the end of the year. The reason why organizations put these rewards in place, which are disproportionate to the responsibilities that you're doing, is because they give you high risk and higher responsibilities. Now, the short answer is, in most cases, the reason why they issue these rewards as employee stock option plan, or ESOPs as they are called, is because they want to retain you in the organization in the long run. They want to give you some qualitative objectives that you need to fulfill, and they are not something which can be fulfilled in a year, 2 years, but they are long-term objectives which the organization wants you to work on. And when this kind of a reward is given, there is a lock-in period defined in these rewards. That means you cannot monetize them before the lock-in period has been, has either elapsed, or if the objectives have been actually met and delivered. A simple example I think we took in a couple of sessions earlier for a different unit was when we looked at Elon Musk, and I quoted that example that he has come up with a different structure wherein he said that I will work in the company, for $1, but I'm going to set aggressive targets for the chief executive as my role. And if the company hits those targets, then my total compensation at the end of each, objective being met would add up to this much. And the Forbes or the Financial Times actually ended up calculating that if Tesla is to hit all the targets that he set, for example, they want to be profitable for 6 consecutive quarters, they want to hit production targets of 200,000 cars or over in a year, they want to successfully launch in a couple of countries, he wants to look at introducing cheaper variants of the Tesla S model. And when you look at these objectives that he had set, his overall compensation that he was looking at taking home within a period of 10 years, if this is to be achieved by the organization. And one of the other thing was that Tesla's share price in the market would hit certain, value or higher, he would take home $1 billion as compensation. Now that, if he ends up leaving the organization would mean that he would not get any of these. As simple as that.
Oh, so it's going to forfeit it once it leaves the organization.
Yeah. So he basically will forfeit. Basically he will forfeit those because there is a lock-in period, or these are only possible to be achieved if and only if these targets are actually set or are actually met essentially. So if you see, it's closing in on achieving 1.4 million bonus for achieving Tesla goals, and this was something that he defined that okay, the future we want for Tesla. So as an organization, what he said was that if he defined certain targets for himself, and he said that I want to take an aggressive stand and take the company from a certain startup that I had when I initially started the company to a certain growth path, and that if I hit these 8 out of these 10 market value goals, which he's basically mentioned, his total take-home package would be in excess of $1.4 billion at the end of 10 years.
Okay.
So these are things which normally you will have within organizations at wherein there is disproportionate risk or gain which is possible, and these are things which normally organizations want you to work on a long-term strategy basis. Like a simple example is Tim Cook, or when you look at some of the top CEOs like Google, when you look at these, the salary of Sundar Pichai, he was in the news a couple of weeks back. When you look at, he was in front of the congressional committee, in the US, Capitol Hill. His total salary, is 200 million in 2016. That is what his salary is. In terms of his total compensation that he received. But if you look at his salary was only $650,000. But when you look at what he achieved in terms of his total compensation is, he achieved 200 million. And the reason why he achieved 200 million was that, the founders of Google, Larry Page, they had set targets which primarily meant that if the company is able to achieve these revenue targets, is able to do this, do that, and those have been met, then the board decided that, okay, that could be the total compensation that you end up receiving, from the company, just because your company has been able to, obviously, under your leadership, the company has been actually able to hit those targets. So Larry Page and, when we look at Sergey Brin, who are the co-founders of Google, they agreed and the board agreed, and then these kind of reward management strategy was put in place for the top management in the organization. You normally see this happening at the top level, but the similar, implementations of these reward management strategies can be done at the middle management, at the junior management, and even in the frontline level where most of the staff actually works. But the definition of reward management changes according to the grade or the hierarchy or the structure of the organization you work in. So at the main, maybe at the receptionist level at the front office, if the company hits the target, everybody is in line for a performance appraisal, and the performance appraisal gives them a salary as of 2, 3, 4, 5% in the year. Correct? But if I go up to the junior management level, if you look at, that is where the differentiation starts to happen. That if they have come in and contributed revenue achievement, then if they have achieved 100% target, you get certain bonus. You get 125%, you get certain bonus. If you have achieved over 125%, you get a certain additional bonus. This then becomes, monetary and non-monetary target, maybe at the middle management, wherein they start to get some stocks which can be divested over a point in time if they continue to meet those targets. And normally the divestment period in most organizations that I've seen is anywhere between 3 to 5 years to 10 years. At the middle management, and again going up to higher management, this then adds up to different types of monetary and non-monetary benefits. So it could be stocks, but in addition, you get access to, say, a personal assistant, you get access to larger teams, you manage certain geographies or country operations, and you get differentiation in terms of the emoluments that you get. you're flying economy class, but you're entitled to fly business class, right?
Okay.
So these kind of things are put into place by HR when they look at understanding the relationship between how critical is the performance or how critical is the role of that individual at that level, and the performance that the person needs to do in terms of putting some sort of a reward management system in place for them. And the link between this and training and development or learning and development is that at some stage, the company does not want to lose an employee. So if they feel that the employee has the real potential, has the skills, has been performing, but lacks certain areas or lacks in certain areas, then they put that individual in terms of training or put that individual into learning and development to do some external trainings to gain those skills and then start performing well within that role. Sometimes you will see organizations, send across employees primarily, for training purposes, because not everybody qualifies for training, but maybe the exceptional performers actually, or the people who are performing over average actually qualify for training. And that itself is an incentive which is seen to higher motivation, higher engagement, more commitment and loyalty to within the organization, because they feel that I am being cared for, I'm wanted, or I am loved within the organization, and that is why the organization is spending money, time and effort on training me and helping me to acquire more skills, which will help the organization go further in terms of achieving the objectives. A simple example that I would give here would be when you look at British Airways. Now, some time ago, when British Airways was the national carrier, they were more concerned about performance and reward management, which was given to the employees because they wanted to achieve the best customer service airline or certain awards or accolades, for the airlines, and they required total cooperation from their staff. And the organizational culture was focused primarily on driving the best performance in terms of customer services, which the airline was providing to its customers. And that is where the HR put a reward management strategy in place that if flights land on time, there are less number of complaints, if more customers are happy, then the company would compensate more in terms of rewards or incentives or bonuses towards their employees within the organization. Now, that was a phase when British Airways was establishing itself as an airline, maybe 5 years back, 10 years back, when other airlines were coming up like ATHE, Qatar, you look at Emirates, you look at some of the other airlines which are Virgin Atlantic, which were in competition directly with British Airways, and their sole aim was to differentiate their service on the basis of customer service essentially, and that is where HR's strategy was to put a reward management strategy in place to say that if we had more reviews, 5-star reviews, we had help, smiling customers, we were getting more business, and because of the better customer services provided, this was being compensated in terms of rewards or incentive bonus structures being given to the employees within the organization. And this helped establish British Airways as one of the most customer-friendly airlines in the early 2000s and the 90s, and in the 1990s and the early 2000s. And these objectives vary. These objectives are like moving goalposts. So at some stage now, when they are an established airline, when a new carrier comes into place, for example, when you look at EasyJet or Ryanair, they have come across with the concept of economy-based airlines, that means, or cheap, no-frill airlines. They have created a different model in the market. And the reason why they've created the model is they've said, okay, we will provide you the same level of service, but no frills, but at a very, very cheaper price. And they are being termed as something called economy airlines or economy, budget airlines in the market. Now, when you look at that, there the focus of HR was primarily on training and development to design programs which are related to doing the specific job, perfectly well to the set standards, which meant that the persons working in those roles were productive, were efficient, and that allowed them to basically, gain more market share in the as compared to, or take away market share from some of the other airlines in the market. So what Ryanair has done is it's become the single largest, airline in Europe, wherein it carries over 429 400, I think, odd million passengers every year, and that by far has become the the biggest budget carrier in the European context. And there the focus has been to reward individuals' performance if they are being productive and efficient, rather than going out of the way. They are expecting individuals to do their daily role, which has been given as per the job description, and that itself is good enough for them to be able to, look at a slightly different goal from British Airways to say that, okay, we are a no-frills airline, we don't provide extra services, but whatever services we have promised we provide them to the best possible quality, and because of which, if they deliver that particular, service which they expect from the employees, they then, get compensated adequately or, proportionately. So a simple example here would be if you work in a temporary role and you work within a contract role and you have a permanent job, you see difference in terms of, different, let's put it this way, different, you see difference in terms of pay scale. If you work within a temporary role or say a role wherein it's a cover role, like a maternity cover role or like a temporary role for a certain point in time because the employee has been taken ill, you do not get all the other additional benefits which the regular employees get who's working in that role, like pension, like, gratuity, or for example, holiday, or in this case, other, let's put it this way, things which the employee might be getting, which could be dental insurance, medical insurance, things like that. But when you work as a contract employee, you don't get any of these. You are on a 0-hour contract, and what tends to happen is they call you on an ad hoc basis, but they pay you a very higher rate of pay on a daily basis because they are needing an expert to come in and do provide certain services to the organization for a day, 2 day, 5 day, or for a certain period of time. So there, the higher rate of pay does away with the other benefits which the employee gets in an organization when the employee is working and having a longevity in terms of the job. And somebody who's working as a permanent staff in the organization has access to pension, a couple of other things, and those then differentiate them from contract or temporary employees. And that is where, the differentiation comes in. When you see the contract worker might not be motivated to do additional work, they might come in and do the basic work which is required. But a permanent employee again would do the basic work which is required because at the end of the month he gets paid. He's conscious of the fact that he needs to deliver on some of the objectives. But when you look at a contract worker coming in who has been given a certain role, they will negotiate and discuss with you that, no, I can't do this much. This is not a good rate, or, this is not possible in this amount of time. So I need certain more days to be able to complete this job. And this negotiation basically shows that the person is trying to, either get a longer contract or a long-term employment by highlighting some of the strengths and skills which he or she would be able to bring into that role to be able to deliver that particular, task or objective which they have been brought in to do. So their motivation and their performance is going to be different, and that is going to be linked to, the remuneration or the compensation they will get for that particular job role. Is that okay?
Yes, please.
Now, towards the end, what I've done is I've put in an article which is published on LinkedIn, and it talks about the relationship between, training, learning and development, and job performance. So if you read that particular article, it will give you some insight into something which is quite recently written in terms of why organizations are putting now a lot of focus on training and development, because the whole idea of talent management, if we dip into the previous unit, is that they want to retain performing employees within the organization. You do not want a churn. You do not want to go out and recruit people again and again, spend that same cost. So what they want to be able to do is spend time on, developing the existing employees within the organization, which would be much more productive and efficient for the organization, less time consuming and money saving. And that is where, it establishes a clear link in the fact that it is important to train employees if they have gap areas, rather than seek employment or start looking at recruitment as an activity to get the replacement for that particular person within the organization or skill set within the organization. Now, what I've also done along with this is I have put in some 2 good handouts on Moodle, and these handouts cover the concept that we've discussed today in a bit more detail. And these handouts basically talk about, external and internal factors and approaches which affect, the reward and performance management. And in terms of, if I just look at, one second. So what I've done is I've put these two. One is to have a bit of an understanding on, what is the relationship between reward management and employee performance. So this is a research paper which was carried out, and what I've done is this is from a journal. So I put that paper on into Moodle so that you are able to read, the key extracts of it, why it is, important to have what you call reward management in place, and how it is related to, an employee's job and his role, and how satisfied they are if they have these motivations put in place in terms of reward management. The other bit which I put is again a journal paper which basically talks about the influence of training and development on how it affects the employee performance within an organization. So this is again a small case study which talks about how learning and development within the organization was able to basically help, help the organization achieve more productivity and, loyalty and commitment from the individuals within the organization. Is that okay?
Yes, please.
So with this, what I'm going to try and do is bring it into today's session, and all this material is uploaded onto Moodle.
Okay.
And this is a big handout which I've put in because I've got this as an extract. Now this discusses the whole unit if you have to study. It's like an ebook, to be honest. It has 4 units in it, but unit 1 is something that you need to look at if you want to look at elaborating on the options of LO1 that we have studied. Okay. And unit 2 in this basically talks about organizational performance. Unit 3 actually talks about employee motivation. It talks about reward management and the link between the two. And what are the various techniques we have studied in terms of, some of the points that we discussed today, intrinsic, extrinsic factors, which are, required to be known from a point of view of, HR, to put this strategy into place. So with this, I think I've covered learning outcome 2 in quite detail. And tomorrow we are looking at covering the 3rd learning outcome, which is to see how do we design and implement reward management system or a reward management strategy within an organization. If I have to assume the role of an HR manager within an organization, what kind of a system would I put in place which is apt for that organization, and how that system be implemented within the organization so that each and every individual does, participates, does not, we are not discriminating, that we are putting higher, rewards for people who are achieving more and lower rewards for people who are in the support function and things like that. So the idea would be to try and discuss, the implementation of this strategy within an organization. How do we implement? We talked about reward management, we talked about performance, we talked about their linkages. Now we want to put it into practice in the learning outcome 3.
Okay.
Okay.
Yes, please.
Now the other thing, just so I'll close, stop recording here.